Well, hello everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Redefining Society podcast here on ITSP Magazine. This is Marco Ciappelli. And as you know, I like to talk about society and I like to talk about technology. And you cannot distinguish the two nowadays. As I like to say, the line between online life or digital life and real life is just something that we made up because it's still life, and that's how we get our information. We talked a little bit before we started here about reading a newspaper old school on a tube in New York or any other place in the world, and how it may seem so weird to someone. And in reality, that's life as it is to read it on your tablet or your iPhone or listening to a podcast. So I hope you guys are going to enjoy this conversation. It's going to be quite interesting, especially because we're getting close to election time here in the United States. There's been a lot of elections and political turmoil, if I can say that, in Europe in the past few days. And we're going to talk about all of that, mostly about misinformation and how that plays into this, with a little sprinkle of AI on top of that, because we have to talk about AI.
Yeah.
So here we are. We have Andrew and Joy that are joining me today, and I would like for them to introduce themselves. Let's start with Joy. Tell us a little bit about yourself and why are you so passionate about this topic?
Sure. My name's Joyce Scott. I am head of Scott Public Relations, which is a communications firm. And as a communicator, I found a professional interest in disinformation. And as I looked at what was going on, particularly in the US, it seemed that disinformation had a major impact in our political and civil unrest. So, to that end, I developed a newsletter to help people to cut through the obfuscation of disinformation and wrote a book called Misinformation and just recently produced a consumer's guide to spotting fake news.
All right. Good enough. Andrew, how about you?
Hi. Well, first, Marco, thank you for having me on. I'm really thrilled to be here. And you can see right over there, there's a picture of a book called Army of Liars. That is the book that I have coming out in September. It's my second book, and it is about disinformation in social media and about Section 230. I have been, my background runs to technology entrepreneurship and audience tracking. I was one of the founders of the Digital Analytics Association, which is the organization that made a home for people who were watching the behaviors of people who came to the corporate websites. This was somewhat before social media. And so I have a background in internet technologies and audience tracking. So this has given me some insights into how audience tracking and social media operates.
Yeah, very good. Very good. It's going to be a good conversation. And I want to start with actually, let's start with what you were telling me about reading a newspaper on the train the other day, because I think that's important, because I go
Yeah,
back to
yeah.
my past of sociology of communication student and political science. And at the time, well, internet was pretty new. I am getting pretty old, obviously, on the other hand. And we were talking about, history of mass communication, mass media, and all of that, and how in order to spot the truth between, let's say, a newspaper from the left or a newspaper from the right, you had to kind of read three newspaper, maybe one from each side, one in the middle, and then make up your mind and decide what could sound
Mhm.
like common sense and the truth. For me, it's not that complicated, but apparently we went a long way from doing this given that people would have been done it anyway, maybe they would read in only one newspaper, to now where we have all this bubble of information, we're letting people, clearly lie 100%, and nobody's fact checking anything. So, Andrew, tell me about this thing that about the newspaper maybe, and how you ended up where we are.
So, just very briefly, the little anecdote that I was telling you was I was recently in New York City, and I was on the subway, and I happened to buy a now rather difficult to find copy of today's issue of the New York Times, which I now call a conservative newspaper, by the way, but that's a whole nother topic. So I was reading it much the way everyone used to read a paper on the subway. And some random guy just said to me, "You are the last person in the world to be reading the newspaper on the subway." And I looked around me and I noticed that is true. And so what I think has happened, the reason why this is impactful is because we have gone from a place where we, as a society, we outsourced fact checking to journalists. This was an assumption we made, that journalists in real newspapers like the New York Times and its many now departed cousins across the country. For instance, the Columbus Dispatch was the first newspaper to have an electronic version. It had over 250,000 circulation. Okay, when it did that, it now has 20,000. So that just gives you an idea of the decimation of newspaper publishing in the United States. But what we did was we assumed that these newspapers had truth standards. That we didn't expect them to be perfect or to have no point of view or any bias, but we will by and large assume that if it was in the newspaper, it wasn't a total fabulism. That it wasn't just something they completely made up with zero evidence whatsoever. And so that became the standard for what you read in public forums. Well, along comes, social media curating your feed so that you only see what they think you should see based on what you looked at, and you're unaware of what they're doing here. So they're curating your feed, and some of it is totally not fact checked. And yet it's not flagged that way. It's just put there as if it's just another article. And people over several generations, I think, have been trained to believe that what you read in a public forum is more or less true. And so the cynical manipulators that look to disseminate disinformation are taking big advantage of that, and they're being very successful at it.
Yeah. That's very true, Andrew. And we also have seen groups and individuals who have taken advantage of this. We saw actors such as Russian disinformation experts who are extremely effective propagandists, actively feeding misinformation and knowing whom to target it to and who would spread it. We've also seen actors who are taking advantage of the rant factor, where you can make a lot of money broadcasting misinformation that gets people upset and yet may agree with their values. We've seen wealthy individuals contributing to what looks like legitimate media, but is actually biased sources of disinformation. And I read recently that there's over 1,200 fake newspapers, if you would. That is, sites that are masquerading as newspapers and look like newspapers, but they aren't. They are totally propaganda engines. So it's a matter of taking advantage of what people assumed were true or fact-checked sources, and an active industry that has grown up. You can even hire an agency now to promote disinformation, just as you used to hire a public relations firm to promote your companies or your position. So now you can hire experts to flood the zone, if you would, with disinformation.
And much of it is bot driven, I believe.
Yes.
It was just a story that came out. I think it was yesterday, where the FBI has discovered over 1,000 Russian bot accounts on Twitter, pretending to be from places like Minneapolis and Wisconsin, and places in the U.S. But what they really are Russian propaganda machines, and they are masquerading as local people. And a lot of them have been taken
it's
down
not
off
just
of
the
that.
Russian. I mean, a large portion of the traffic on the internet is bots. There are the good bots and the bad bots. There is a company that I work with sometimes, Imperva. It's not advertising. They are sponsor of us anyway, but they look at that. They do a report every year. There is the good and bad bots, and they're the one that scrap the price on ticket. That's why you pay Taylor Swift ticket so much. That's why you don't find a flight to go somewhere when the 4th of July, and then there is an algorithm now that control all of that. And yeah, you're correct. I mean, it goes on and on and on in terms of what they can do. But where I want to go with this, because it's about technology and society. A lot of people point the finger at technology and say, yeah, it's all screwed up because of technology. Now it's going to be all screwed up because of AI. Truth is that it's a tool. So does this come with technology, or as anything else, there is the bad actors that take advantage of these? And maybe we haven't done much about it, because even internet wasn't secure when it started, because it was a talk between 3 universities. And now we get hacked all over the places. So what's your take, both of you, on this? Joy, let's start with you this time.
Sure. The technology had capabilities that simply weren't anticipated. And for example, in the United States, we have such a firm allegiance to free speech. The attitude was that any efforts to curb that were unconstitutional and should not be allowed. However, we do have regulation of traditional media where they are held accountable for the accuracy of what they're reporting. But with social media, it was originally back in the 90s seen as a bulletin board, and you can't be held accountable for posting something on a bulletin board. Those days are long gone, and we find most people getting the information online and via social media today. So in Europe and other countries, there are different standards, and there seems to be a higher level of understanding of the dangers of lies and propaganda, of hate speech, and the media engines are more strictly policed. In fact, many companies come to the U.S. because we have lower standards for liability, for veracity, and they have much greater freedom to broadcast disinformation. So I think it's a huge social problem in America that we need to face up to. We need stricter laws. We need to look at not only people's rights, but also the damage that is caused when those rights are exercised and people are harmed. And we need balance in our legislation and in our society to account for that and to really protect us.
Yeah, I agree. I would say that what I think what the specific law you're referencing, Joy, if I'm not mistaken, is a thing called Section 230 of the 1996 Communications Decency Act, which, for those who don't know, and I'll be very brief, it was created in order to protect what then were the, a CompuServe bulletin board, which was not being monetized. There were no recommendation engines. None of the sophisticated things that are part of the landscape now existed then. And it was really very simple. It was a very flat bulletin board. Do you want to buy a bicycle? Call me. And that was it. So these protections made sense because the dichotomy that was being addressed then and now actually is that, if you're a bulletin board, you're essentially a carrier, kind of like a phone company, right? Where you're not at all responsible for anything anybody says or does because you have no control over it. No, the phone company can't shut your phone call down if they don't like it. And yes, you could be plotting murder on the phone. The phone company will never be liable for that because they have no control over what is being said or done on the phone. Okay, that makes sense. Whereas publishers, and let's leave social media out of here for a minute, publishers, or those who can decide what is going to be promoted by their vertically integrated platform of distribution, of content distribution, in the real world, in publishing, in mainstream media, cable and television, there is a responsibility to not lie, not tell damaging lies about other people or companies. Perfect example: Fox News, not a digital platform, lied about Dominion voting systems, had to pay out $750 million. If they had been Meta or X, they wouldn't have to pay a nickel. So what's happened is that these social media companies are engaging in a sleight of hand, in my personal opinion. They're trying to say, we're not publishers, we're platforms. And they do this by claiming what I call a legal quantum superposition, which means, I don't know if you know about the Schrodinger's cat. It's dead and alive at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of a Newtonian impossibility, right? And in law, I feel like this is also, frankly, an impossibility because they're claiming that at once they're blind, can't do anything about what anybody does on their platform, and not blind. They can take it down if they want to. So they have these two rights, which puts them in a unique position, which is frankly above the law. They can allow beheading videos on their sites. They can allow ISIS to recruit people to murder people, and they have. And they have control over it. They could take it down if they want to. Now they'll say, oh, it's really hard and we can't find most of it, to which I say, you have a bunch of computers there, I heard, and your payment systems are awfully complicated. I bet you could figure this out. But that's kind of beside the point. The important thing is that they're claiming to be something that's actually impossible, except in a fantasy land where they live. And if we were to be fair about it, they'd either be a carrier like the phone company, in which case they wouldn't be able to censor anything, or they're a publisher where they can have anything they want, but it has to be, it can't be libelous. So what I would say is not that we need a bunch of new laws or regulations, but that we need to get rid of just one, which would mean that they then could get sued, which is really what keeps the other publishers in line. It's not that the government's going to come after them. It's that someone who's been harmed by their speech will come after them.
Yeah, really a lot to unpack right there. And I like the reference with the quantum superimposition, because in a way, if we want to break it down, they want to have the cake and eat it too. How about
exactly
that? Right?
Exactly.
It's a sleight of hand. They know they're not. They know they're media companies, and I know that if we got rid of Section 230, they'd still be massive media companies. They just wouldn't be irresponsible massive media companies.
Right. They found a loophole. They took advantage of it. But so there is the technology probably to control this. It's missing the legal and the enforcement for doing this. So something would need to change. A lot of people say, well, it's not going to change, and it's we need to educate the users. And I think that's important. I'm a big fan of education. I think that a lot of problems in our society come from ignorance, to be honest with you.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
But at the same time, we need to accept the fact that it's a shortcut to not take responsibility for all these other people and say, well, it's not my problem. But you have to say that don't put the candle near the drapery, otherwise it's going to get on fire.
Yeah.
So why not making a note or a disclaimer on this may be bullshit, and maybe you need to not put it in practice. So I don't know, Joy, is there a way out of this, in your opinion? Or I think you mentioned legislation would probably do something, and maybe Europe is kind of leading the way on this.
Yes. Holding these companies accountable for the content of what they are publishing, I think is the first step, and things are not going to change until that happens. When we talk about educating people to be able to tell what's real and what isn't, that's very important. But in a sense, we are also trying to lock the barn after the horse has taken off and is over in the next state, if you would. There has been so much disinformation, and so many millions of people are completely invested in it now. This is going to be hard. But we do need to see a lot more examples of how to push back against disinformation, how to raise the question, is there any evidence that supports this? To educate people about things like whataboutism, when the most famous example may be the welfare queen of the 1980s that has convinced so many people that there's a lot of people who are living off welfare and doing very, very well, when this was actually just one example. Fallacious thinking of, well, if this has happened, if X is true, then Y and Z must be true, and that's not the case. So it's very difficult to identify these nuances when you live in a bubble, as we all tend to do, and everybody talks and thinks the same, and we all do the same things. So it's going to be an uphill battle, but the best place to start doing that, I think, is in politics, which we're all watching right now, at least in the U.S. We're still having our election activities going on, and to see how some experts can start pushing back and stop this flow from going on unchecked.
Yeah. Well, Andrew, let me add one thing to this. So I do a lot of cybersecurity conference, not from the cybersecurity practitioner. That's my partner, Sean. He's the cybersecurity expert. I look at the social engineering. I look at things that have effect on society. And where I'm going with this is that I feel like there is always somebody, obviously, that take advantage of the psychology of the humans. And it can be for political reason, for stealing your money, for making romantic scam, or whatever it is. The point is, like, to what Joy was saying, is that at a certain point you need to say freedom is cool, but now everybody's going to wear the helmet. Freedom is cool, but there is traffic lights with a red and green and orange, and if you cross it, you're going to get a ticket, and then we're going to take your car. You can't drink and drive. So freedom, but there are certain things that you can't do because they damage other people and infringe other people's freedom. And it's not that complicated. But you have a book behind that you wrote, Army of Liars, and who is gonna stop this army is a big question. But for me, it's more about, is it the will to do that in this country?
Well, I certainly hope there is. I'm always looking to expand the constituency of people who are fighting back against disinformation, because disinformation is a tool of war. And I do feel like if you put all these things together, if you put the massive amount of disinformation that's being disseminated, plus things like Project 2025 and the comments coming out of the right wing now about this will be bloodless if the left wing lets it be, and things like this. I feel like we're entering a tumultuous time where almost anything could happen. And so I think it's all, right now I feel like I sure hope there's a will to do this. It's going to take the efforts of all good people to try and keep us from falling off the cliff. I feel like education is a large part of it. I think this, media illiteracy is a huge problem. People do not. I was looking at watching a ball game the other day, and it was one of those stadiums that has a water feature outside. It wasn't San Francisco. I think it was Pittsburgh, actually. And I saw there were people on like floaties. They were floating on rubber mats in the water, and they were just staring at their cell phones. And I was like, okay, this is, we've now entered a dimension where you don't even enjoy hanging out on the river anymore. Now, that's not good enough. It's just a place for you to park while you stare at your cell phone. So clearly the cell phone has become the center of life. And therefore, we need to pay more attention to what's coming out of it. And it can't just be whatever the corporate giants feel like putting out there, because it's too dangerous. It's kind of like when we had, when I first got started in the tech industry, we used to say, oh, it's like 1905, when the first cars were being put on the road. And okay, so well, now it's, 20 years later, now it's 1925, and there's millions of cars, and I don't know if you guys know this, but in the 1920s there were millions and millions of cars and no traffic rules. Like there were no one-way streets, there were no traffic lights, there were no cops to direct traffic. It would just be a big free-for-all. And
until a car killed a person, if I remember well.
Oh yeah, well, the story is that there was two cars in the state of Ohio and they collided.
Oh,
so
okay. I thought it was a pedestrian, anyway, there was a few facts that made this happen.
Yeah, there was almost no cars in existence, and then somebody got run over. So it started quickly, and cars are a wonderful thing, and they're also dangerous. And I think we're all very much happier today that we have safety glass and crumple zones, seat belts, anti-lock brakes, and we have traffic regulations, and I don't see anybody complaining about these things.
Right.
And we are simply entering a phase where the technology has become, defining for society, to the point where it just needs to be looked at like all the other technologies that have been brought under regulation. They actually become better and more useful. And I think that's kind of where we have to look.
Well, you gave me an idea I write a newsletter together with my AI here and there, and I haven't even read it. When you tell about the cell phone, the people looking at the cell phone while they were in the boat. One day I realized I like to go to concert and watch rock music and other kind of music. And I realized I was at a Guns N' Roses concert. And I was like, I watched 1/3 of the concert through my freaking phone, taking videos and taking picture. And I'm like front row here. And instead of seeing, Slash shredding guitar live, because I am here, I'm
Yeah,
watching it
yeah,
through the lens of my phone, so I can share whatever I'm watching with other people, the
I
video.
know.
So you gave me this idea to like we're watching our life through the lens and the filter of technology,
Hmm.
which is the phone. Very philosophical thoughts that I want to develop as a piece. But based also on this, let's touch on AI, because if the filter is social media, the cell phone where social media is and where all the generative AI is happening nowadays, the Chat GPT, and Apple is going to put it as well very soon. It seems to me that every technology, you bring the example of the car, but every technology is a little bit or a lot more powerful than the one before.
Hmm.
Cars, yeah, hammer is technology, but a hammer is dangerous if I hit you in the head, but I can't hit 600 people in the head at the same time, or 6 million of people. With disinformation, I'm hitting people on the head in very large number, and with AI, really
Yeah,
fast too, and
yeah,
really accurate. So
yes, yes.
let's take a couple of minutes before we wrap this very interesting conversation in your thoughts on how AI is going to help, or
It's a double-edged sword.
yeah.
Uh, my experience with it is twofold. Um, I have a good story and a bad story. So the bad story is being stuck at an overseas at an airport, uh, trying to get the idea of when my flight would actually leave, and trying to get a human being on the phone, but discovering that all customer service has turned into AI empowered bots, and they cannot actually answer any question. They just keep cycling through standard questions, and they don't tell you anything. So I feel like that part of AI, where it's supposed to do a job, is I liken it to the .com bust 25 years ago. It's not there yet. There's probably going to be a bust. It's not making any money, and they can't figure out how to really make it work. It's good enough to be a problem, and that's where I think it is today. And it needs more. It needs a lot more work before it gets to where it's going. But on the other hand, I would say that I have been trying to create memes for my articles, and I discovered this tool where, and I cannot even believe that this is going on with generative AI. I think generative AI is truly scary, and wonderful at the same time. And I'm very conscious of people's content being stolen, which is a whole nother issue. But there's this tool out there where you type in what you want, and in real time, as you type in each word, it gives you this fully rendered picture that looks like somebody spent 1,000 hours on it. I mean, these are extremely detailed, dimensional, beautiful pictures, and it just changes second by second as you type in. If you say, lizard monster in fights King Kong, well, within half a second, that's going to be there.
Okay,
And
you
so
need to
the
tell me what
technology,
that is, because I've never seen it and I want to see it.
it's called Imagine.ai.
Okay.
And it is extraordinary. And so I think for the creative arts, generative AI is going to be very game changing, especially in movies and television and stuff like that. But I think as far as its usefulness in society as an arbiter of truth, or a purveyor of helpful information, long way to go. Long way to go.
And this also brings in the media literacy question, because it's going to be even harder to tell what may be genuine and true and what is created. So learning to look at things that, if it's outrageous, look into it, do your own fact checking, find other legitimate sources, know the media and which are factual and which are partisan. There's a chart called Ad Fontes, excuse me, ADFONTES, that is an objective rating of media resources. And if you find one that's using AI incorrectly and or that is broadcasting disinformation, stop listening to it, stop reading it. But AI right now has not demonstrated that it is accurate. There are a lot of people who've used it to try to write and found that it came up with information that's just totally not
Yeah.
viable. Articles were cited that don't exist. So it's very dangerous in that regard to be using it to vet sources of truth. So the
Yeah.
problem here is many faceted. And again, it calls for this initiative on media literacy and pushing back on AI generated propaganda.
Yeah.
I always have this joke where the fact that AI, generative AI, hallucinate and make it even more human, because human hallucinate constantly too. By hallucination, meaning I'll just come up with something. I don't know the answer, but I'm going to. I don't even know how many times
Yeah. I got to come up with something.
yeah, how many times I caught, the AI that I use and say, "Are you sure about that?" "Oh yeah, Marco, I'm sorry, I misspoke." And and then
Yeah.
and then they come up with some other things that is not true.
Yeah.
But anyway, I think we are at the point where AI is super powerful, as you mentioned, Andrew, especially generative AI. It's a full Pandora's box to open and experiment. I'm one of those that like actually AI, even for the creative. I know a lot of people are not going to like what I say. I don't like the fact that it's still content, but I think there is a lot that you can do with it. But to use it as the ultimate truth, no. But we also say at the beginning that newspaper, despite an editor, despite the journalists' ethics and oath in a way to the truth, also it's not something that you have to trust, that you can trust 100%. So my point is, you always need to kind of double check things, and that is true as with AI and as any other thing that we deal with. So I
I
think
agree.
we need to find a way to live with it, and I think that someone that can make the rules need to help us a little bit with it. They may not resolve the whole problem. I'm kind of summarizing our conversation here, but if they give a really good stab to making responsible this platform, then we will deal with a lot less of
Yeah.
misinformation, I think.
I agree. I'm all about level playing field, and I don't think it's a level playing field right now.
Yeah.
There's another resource that I should mention called Fact Checks, FAKCHEX. It's a free Substack newsletter that addresses articles or has articles that are fact checked about topics that have a lot of disinformation around them. And another service called NewsGuard that helps to vet news information. So if we can get more people to start using some of these tools and sharing them and sharing what they're finding out is actually truth, it will help. It may not be a total answer, but we need truth advocates, if you would, who can help
Absolutely.
us all fight back against this.
Yep. And I think to conclude that as an advice that I follow what you just said, and Andrew, what you just said to the users is that unless you are okay with that, you are into the lie of one side or the other or whatever it is. AI or any other tool like the fact check tool, it's a good cleanup system. It's not gonna take everything out and give you the perfect, but it's a good help to mitigate the damage. Maybe out of 1,000 news, you know that 95 percent are lies, and then you are left to decide of what the other 5% is. I think it gets a little easier. So that's where technology could help, I think.
If we could get AI to do that, yeah. I haven't seen that yet, but it would be nice.
Hopefully,
Yeah.
hopefully we'll
That would
get there.
be an ideal solution to
Yeah.
automatically correct disinformation at the source.
Yeah, I think there is
Be
people
a browser
working on that.
plugin.
Yeah, search engine is kind of like the same thing. I'm actually, there are search engines that are using nowadays AI to get contextual results, but also based on like consensus, for example, for academic paper and things that have been vetted by the academic community and so on. So we need to remember that it's still very fresh. The internet hasn't been existing for as long as cars, and it's probably even more powerful for our brains. So I think these conversations are very important, and I'm very glad that Joy and Andrew, you joined me for this. Of course, we could have gone so many different places, but we are 41 minutes, so I'm gonna call it off. I'm gonna thank you, and I'm gonna thank all the people that listened so far. I hope that you have more questions now than when you started, because questioning, it's actually a really good thing. So thank you so much, Andrew and Joy.
Thank you.
Marco.
Thank you very much.